Welcome back. Before we get into the lecture, I would like to show you a video.
We are following major developments in the growing political crisis in Venezuela. Its president severed diplomatic relations with the U.S. after President Trump backed an opposition leader who's claimed the presidency. The standoff comes amid rising violence. 7 people were killed yesterday during massive protests demanding President Nicolas Maduro step down. Security forces used tear gas and water cannons against the demonstrators. Major Garrett is at the White House with more on this developing story. Major, good morning to you.
Good morning. It has long been a priority of this White House and bipartisan voices in Congress to pressure Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to step down. Now the White House has formally backed opposition leader Juan Guaido. Now, bloodshed and violence, repression already exist in Venezuela, but this move carries the risk of still more. Now, sources tell CBS News Guaido swore himself in as interim president yesterday and is now in hiding in the capital city of Caracas. The 35-year-old Guaido is head of the National Assembly, regarded by most international observers as the last remaining democratic institution in the country. Now, the U.S. and most world powers see Maduro as a dictator and regard his recent re-election nothing more than a sham. To ramp up pressure, the administration is considering sanctioning Venezuela's lucrative oil exports. Maduro still has major backers on the world stage, namely China and Russia. It is unclear how deep his support runs among Venezuela's military or federal police. Venezuela is in the midst of a massive humanitarian crisis, the worst by far in the hemisphere. Food and medicine are scarce, and violence on the streets rampant. Now, Maduro says the U.S. has 72 hours to remove its embassy personnel. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said because the United States does not recognize Maduro as legitimate, that order will be ignored. The president said in 2017, 2018, and again yesterday, all options are on the table to support the opposition. John?
All right, Major, thank you. I saw one fact, inflation in Venezuela up 1,000,000%.
Whoa.
Money, paper, just is worthless.
It's a huge story.
Yeah.
It's a huge story. We'll continue to cover it.
How do you think about the video? Let's have some detail on today's chapter.
After seeing the news of Venezuela by CBS in the early 2019, what do you think about Venezuela? Many of you may know Venezuela was a very wealthy country in Latin America 10 or 20 years ago. It has abundant resources such as oil and agriculture. While these days, Venezuela ends up in a chaos. Before you answer this question, we need to know the major system which a country like Venezuela builds upon. For this chapter, we focus on 3 major systems: political, economy, and legal systems. In addition, we will also explore how these 3 systems affect a nation as well as the residents in this nation. As you can see on the slide, each system has its important constructs. Political system focus on 2 spectrums, from collectivism to individualism, and from democratic to totalitarian. Economy systems have 3 categories, such as market economies, command economies, and mixed economies. Legal systems has 3 law systems, including common law, civil law, and theocratic law. Let's get more details on political systems first. The first spectrum to identify the political system of a nation is collectivism versus individualism. On the one hand, collectivism always collective goals over individual goals in a society and a nation. The examples of collective visions are communalism and social democracy. Take Venezuela as an example. Venezuela is a social democratic nation. On the other hand, individualism asserts that individuals should have freedom in his own economy and political rights. That is to say, a society is an individualism when it pursues more individual diversity and private ownership. We, the USA, is an individual nation. The second spectrum to identify the political system of a nation is democracy versus totalitarianism. For one thing, democracy is that people vote for their government, either directly or through elected representatives. For example, we, the USA, is a democratic nation because we vote for our senators, governors, and president. Although Venezuela has its voting system, and people in Venezuela can vote for their president, Venezuela is not a pure democratic country. The major critique of Venezuela is Venezuela has been ruled by many dictators who own the army to support their power in the nation. For another thing, totalitarianism is a government ruled by one person or one political party. Specifically, there are four types of totalitarianism. First one, communist totalitarianism, such as North Korea. Second one, theocratic totalitarianism. It can be found in states where political power is monopolized by a party, group, or individual that governs according to religious principles. For example, Iran and Saudi Arabia are the theocratic totalitarianism nations. Third one, tribal totalitarianism. It can be found in states where a political party that represents the interest of a particular tribe monopolizes power. For example, Uganda and Kenya had been the tribal totalitarianism country. The next one, right-wing totalitarianism, which permits some individual economic freedom, but restricts individual political freedom. For example, Colombia back to 1980s was a right-wing totalitarianism country. Economic system have three types. Market economy are mean or productive activity are governed by the supply and the demand of a market. All productive activities are private owned. The role of a government is to encourage free and fair competition. Command economy means government plans the goods and the service that is produced, the quality that is produced, and the price at which they were sold. All business are state-owned. Then mixed economy are in between market economies and the command economies. I think most of economies are mixed economy. However, some are more toward market economy and others are more toward command economies. For example, Venezuela is more toward command economies since Venezuela government owns the oil business. There are three different legal systems in terms of three different roles. Common law is based on tradition. Precedent and custom. However, when you design contracts in the common law country, those contracts tend to be very detailed with all contingency spelled out. So the details of a contract can cover the simplicity of the common law. Civil law is based on detailed set of law organized into codes. However, when you design contracts in the civil law country, those contracts tend to be much shorter and less specific. Theocratic law is based on religious teachings. When you design contracts in the theocratic law system, those contracts cannot be against the religious belief, and the enforcement may depend on religious and interpersonal relationship. Again, use Venezuela as an example. Venezuela is a civil law system. After learning about the national political, economy, and legal system, you may think how these three systems relate to multinational business. First, when you conduct or plan to expand the international business in a certain country, you have to know about the nation's political, economy, and legal system. Second, these three systems actually lead to the property rights. By definition, property rights are the legal rights over the use on which a resource is put and over the use made of any income that may be derived from that resource. For example, land, car, and house. In a nation with a weak protection of property rights, you may find it very difficult to do business there. Most of the time, the unsound political, economic, and legal system can lead to corruption, which damage people's property rights. As you can see on the slide, Venezuela is the second corrupted country in 2014. Intellectual property rights are another form of property rights. By definition, intellectual property is a product of intellectual activity. These days, intellectual property rights are getting more important because we are in a high-tech and knowledge-intensive world. Although you may think the use of patents, copyrights, trademarks, lawsuits, and legal actions to protect the intellectual property, it is very difficult and time-consuming to defeat an imitate, defector, and a copycat in a country with the unsound political, economy, and legal system. When this is the case, you may need your government to step in and intervene. That's the exactly condition facing USA and China government now.
Alright, that's all for this chapter. If you have any question, write me an email. I will see you next section.